Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to each attendee. I head up GraceOne Wealth, and I'm also one of the founders of the company. A special welcome to our presenter, Albert Coetzee. Albert Coetzee spent most of his career at 91, most recently as the head of 91 Global Investment Platform. And effective January 2025, Albert consults to 91 and other investment companies like ourselves, bringing his expertise to engagements with advisors and their client base. So Albert is a qualified lawyer and a certified financial planner. So welcome to you, Albert.
Thank you very much, Tanya.
So GraceOne has partnered with Albert to present to our clients on a few topics which are not necessarily investment-related technical topics, but topics where we notice our clients need more guidance. And the topic that we're tackling this afternoon is aspects relating to pre- and post-death, with an emphasis on some practicalities when a loved one passes. So death is the one life event none of us can escape, yet most of us do not properly plan for it. And at some point in life, all of us will face losing a loved one and have to deal with the administration in addition to the grief that we are experiencing. So although some of you might have gone through this process, or more than once maybe, Albert is going to walk us through the practical, the legal, and then some of the overlooked aspects of estate planning and estate administration. So our intention this afternoon is to deal with this topic in a sensitive manner, as some attendees might be dealing with a recent loss. And secondly, we understand that all families have unique situations. So please do not accept what we say this afternoon as advice. We will share suggestions and recommendations that might not be applicable to everyone or necessarily right for every situation. You are welcome to type any questions that you might have in the chat box. As we go along, either Albert or myself will handle these questions, and then afterwards we'll send you a recording of this meeting. So Albert, over to you.
Thank you, Tanya. Good afternoon, everyone. Goeiemiddag almal. Thank you for your time. I know it's a week between holidays, so for you sitting here attending this presentation is a privilege. I know you've got a lot of other things to do. And also, Tanya and team, thank you for the opportunity. I've been working with GraceOne for a long time, and it's always really a privilege and honor to work with you and also be associated with you, because I do rate you as one of the highest and top advisors I deal with on a daily basis in South Africa. As Tanya said, this topic is close to my heart, what nobody tells you when someone dies. Very important. I'm a lawyer, but I'm not a practicing lawyer. I worked for 25 years, as Tanya mentioned, for 91, and now I consult to various companies on investment-related matters, also structuring of investments. So I'm not a practicing lawyer, and I'm most definitely not also a estate administrator. So even though I've going to sort of provide a little bit of tidbits of information to you, there are definitely topics or areas of which I may not know the answer, but I always can get that to you. To start with, interesting, when I speak to advisors, when I speak to clients, and the reason why this topic is close to my heart is that all of us are triggered by different things. When I speak to a client or an advisor, fees are very important. For some, for example, costs are very important. For some, very important, performance is important. So whatever I do, my underlying instrument or share or unit trust must perform well. Then when you get to me, is yes, I don't mind paying fees, point one. I don't mind paying taxes and costs as long as it is not CITES tax, which can be as high as 40% in America and in England. I'll touch on that a little bit later. But what triggers me is when I close my eyes and I say, when something happened to me, from me, how long does it take to move to my spouse? Are there going to be any stumbling blocks from me to my spouse? And I use the word, and it's a word which I try to avoid as far as possible in my life related to investments, is, are there any unintended consequences which me and my spouse or family potentially did not prevent or did not know about? So that you can immediately find that triggers me. So when Tanya asks me, Albert, let's touch on this topic, what nobody tells you when someone dies, obviously I jumped to it because in the process I also did some research, because this is a very important topic to me, which is close to my heart. But then when you look at this topic, it's almost like nobody tells you when someone dies. That means I've already died. Now what happens? So when I chatted to Tanya, I said, Tanya, let's reverse a bit. Let's maybe go one or two steps backwards, because everyone on the call today are alive. So if they listen to my session today with Tanya, to say, for example, what can we do today to potentially you didn't do, or sort of like didn't know about, to potentially do or prevent from, for example, the moment or the time or day you passed away. My one slide, which is a very famous slide, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, is that one slide, what concerned clients. I'm going to show you that in the next second. Then I'm going to move, remember I'm still alive, then I'm going to move to the various investment vehicles during my lifetime. Now, in my lifetime at 91, working with top tier independent financial advisors and wealth managers across the country, I very often find the unintended consequences, the problems, the issues, the illiquidity, which I find or my family find on death, could have been prevented if my investment vehicles was structured correctly before I passed away. I'll do the comparison between my will. You have to have a will. If you sit here today attending the session, and you don't have a valid original will somewhere updated and saved somewhere where for you, your spouse, and your family members know about, I honestly feel that you're putting the cart in front of the horses, because you want to hear about these things, how to save taxes, estate duty, liquidity, all those things, but you don't have a will. That for me is a massive, not even a very big, a massive no, because that is where everything starts. But when you look at the will, I personally say I have to have a will, but I don't like a will. And somebody the other day said that to a client. The client almost got shocked when I said, I don't like a will. Because with the will, if you close your eyes, is for me is equal to the master's office, equals to an executor. Now, yes, there's potentially fees involved. I don't mind paying that, but there's also delays involved, which I cannot control. That scares me. Where potentially to say, if you don't want to do that, what is the alternative? Point number 4 is a very quick one, sort of interesting fact to show you what I deal with on a day-to-day basis. If you look at everything on this slide, if there's one thing I leave you with to say, Albert, that is something I need to get up to date. Today is the end of April. By the 10th, the 15th, the end of May, my life file for me and my spouse will be updated. I've achieved my goal with Tanya and Team Grace Swan. Point 6 and 7 is just sort of tidbits to say what happens the day I die in the first week, thereafter. And then point number 7 is once the executor is appointed, how does the estate late process work until allocation? But let's get going. When I speak to top tier, and sometimes in 1 week, I can speak up to 250 advisors. And they're all top tier advisors, independent or wealth managers. When I speak to them, say, Mr. Advisor, Miss Advisor, when you speak to your clients, or very often, I'm in the meeting with the end client. What worries you? What concerns you? These are the top 10. Interesting, sort of like they move, but they stay constant. The only one I need to almost add as a point 11 here is I'm getting a lot of questions about Albert. I have a South African company. The company has money, investments, cash. What are the best way to structure the investment owned by the company? Or must I pay my dividend withholding tax out to be able to restructure. Won't do it today, so actually I can add a 11th point. When you quickly look at it, sort of create liquidity on death. It's not about when I die, does the estate have enough money? As again, remember what triggers me? For me, point number one is when I die, how quick, how fast, how efficient can my wife get the money to survive? That's point number one. Point two is when I sit with a lot of money in a bank account, and for example, there's interest. How can I deal with that interest? Because I get taxed on the interest. But remember now, very important, when I have money in a bank account, what governs the bank account? My will. And when the will governs, remember, close your eyes, will, master, executor, how long is that? Especially if all the money sits in my bank account and I passed away today. Point number three is pure about manipulation of estate duty. Not really relevant to our discussion, but innerget death equals estate duty. And I use the word, there's a very hard word, manipulate my estate duty, which means regardless of your age, there are ways to manipulate estate duty. Our magical word, Tanya and I, intergeneration transfer of wealth. How can I transfer the wealth fast, efficient to the next generation? But when you look at that point, another soft point I have is that spouse. Because intergeneration transfer of wealth is meaning I'm transferring the wealth from the baby boomers who made the money to the next generation. But don't forget and don't underestimate. Remember, as per the stats, my wife is going to live longer than me. So point number four means the money must first transfer from me to my spouse, to my children. So we need to keep a very close and special eye on that spouse, especially if the spouse is not in the day-to-day dealings with wealth and investments. How do I get money in a trust? I don't want to lend it. I don't want to donate it. Are there other ways for me to get money in a trust? Point number six, and you'll see from now on, everything touch on point number six. I find that is extremely important. I'd almost say on this slide, the most important thing here related to our topic is beneficiary nomination, and I will confirm that to you a little bit later. Point number seven, you can see every point is important to me. Close my eyes, Albert. How do I guarantee the flow of money? The money is in South Africa, the money is overseas. The money is overseas in a share portfolio. How do I guarantee to avoid those unintended consequences? That's also very important, because if there are consequences, even though my intention was great, that means my spouse needs to wait, delay. How is she going to survive? You'll see my trigger point there again. Transition of wealth while I'm alive. I talk about donations tax. What points are there to be able to assist in a financial planning structure? Offshore bank accounts is the same as point number two. First of all, you pay tax if there's interest, but secondly, there's very illiquid because it's part of the master will net. But very often on offshore bank accounts is also probate in that jurisdiction, which first needs to be dealt with. And point number 10, forget about everything. Just look at that last word, CITES tax. Now, CITES tax is if I own US shares, the share register is registered in America or registered in the UK. CITES tax can be as high as 40%, and that is instead of South African estate duty, which can be between 20% for the first 30 million and 25% for any amount above 30 million. Now, when you look at this, and this I went through it just to sort of entice you, didn't go in much detail, but in front of you now, this is currently what I spend my life about as a consultant or working with various companies to assist advisor and client to say, are you in agreement? This is what worries you. If so, how we deal with it? How do we counter with that to avoid that these lines give you problems? But now when you look at our topic says what nobody tells you when someone dies for me is the key word. Now, keep in mind these 10 points. Look, for example, here. Anything highlighted in white, touch my topic. So it was nice to see, Tanya, that even though my top 10 points concerning clients is actually tying in very nicely, very closely, for example, with the topic you provided. But before I proceed, I'm going to have a quick poll. Thank you, Bailey. I get it very often, and I'm going to sort of sketch the following scenario to you. I am 77 years old. 7 years ago, I have a son, Albert. Albert works in the financial services industry. And I thought, you know what, it's time now. Albert is capable. Albert deals with these things every day. And I've signed a power of attorney. I'm completely valid. I've completely sort of compos mentis. I just want my son to take over because I'm slowing down a bit and I want my son to do everything on my behalf. That's why I signed a power of attorney. Fast forward 7 years later. I'm now 77 years old, but unfortunately, I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia. But luckily, I've signed a power of attorney 7 years ago when I was completely compos mentis. My question to you, does a power of attorney remain valid once the client develops Alzheimer's dementia? Taking into account I've signed it 7 years ago when I was completely compos mentis, and I gave the power of attorney to my son Albert to transact on my behalf. Plain and simple, yes or no. Good. Bailey, let me know if it works or let me know, otherwise I proceed. So interesting, does a power of attorney remain valid once the client develops Alzheimer's dementia? It's about 50-50, but the majority, about 57%, said yes, it remains valid. It's interesting, no, the answer is wrong. The moment I develop Alzheimer's dementia, that means my compos mentis is not on the same level as my son. The power of attorney falls away. Now, when my son knows that, acknowledge that, and continue to sign on my behalf, that is fraud. Now, watch out for the word also when you speak to the banks, when you speak to 91, the platform, the investment houses. The moment we hear that word, the doors come closed down fast because no one now can transact on behalf of the client. The client must go to court and appoint a greater bonus to transact on his or her behalf. The same applies, it's actually very strange. I've signed a power of attorney to act on my behalf. Now I'm in a car accident and I lie in hospital in a coma. The power of attorney falls away because my compos mentis is not on the same level as the person I gave the power of attorney to. It's a massive, massive gap in our industry because South Africa doesn't have or acknowledge a thing called an enduring power of attorney. I continue with this comment, and this off the point, it's not related to the session, but I test every time I present to end clients. And my promise to myself is I'll stop asking this question until the majority of the group says, you know what, a power of attorney falls away on death. If that worries you, if that concerns you, please speak to Tanya and see if we can assist you in that regard. When we move forward, there you are. Now, very important, don't make notes. I'll send you the slide back to Tanya, and she's welcome to forward it to you afterwards. This is a slide that's close to me. I spend my life talking about financial wealth, sort of like intergeneration succession. How can you get the wealth from the father to the mother to the children, fast, efficient, cost and tax efficiently and friendly? But I think also it's very important, there's always a place for this slide as well, that when I bequeath assets to my family, maybe financial wealth is not that much, but don't feel bad or don't feel left behind, because everything else, wisdom, social skills, health, view of family, memories, mental health, good name, identity, legacy, confidence, values, and tradition and support system. For me, sometimes, yes, that sometimes don't pay the bills, But if my children have those things, if I installed those things into my children, most likely they don't need my wealth because they themselves will make a great success of their lives. So I wanted to highlight this slide to you because I think that is as powerful and important. Let's move to the various investment vehicles. That's very important because when I now do financial planning, yes, sort of like, yes, to avoid when I die, but also financial planning in general. So first of all, I cannot proceed when my will and my testament is up to date, correct, and original version. Speaking to my one sister one day, love it to bits. I said, you are married? Yes. I said, where's your will? With my husband. Fine. Where's the will? No, it's with the advisor. Have you ever met the advisor? No. The advisor is somewhere in Johannesburg. Do you have the name? Yes. Do you have the contact number? Yes. But where are the offices? I don't know. Have you ever spoken to the advisor? No, I have not. In my view, that is unacceptable. So it doesn't matter if the spouse is maybe not as financial educated, the spouse focus on other matters. In my view, of all apologies, there's no excuse. You need to know where's the will, the original will, the up-to-date will, that when something happened to me today, you can walk to the cupboard and fetch the will. You can also have a second will, original, same will, so you can have two original versions. If you feel like maybe something will happen at home, fire, water, theft, for example, have that original copy somewhere else, but the spouse remaining must know where that will is. And again, I'm repeating myself, apologies, that is unacceptable if you do not know where the original will is. Spoke to a friend over the weekend, preparing for this presentation. He said, Albert, it is an educated professional person. It's in my inbox. Now, email, a will in my inbox is not original. That's not going to work. Where's the original? Trust, there's various ways to work with trust. I mentioned to you earlier, very important, I can lend, I can donate, but don't forget, a trust can also inherit from you. A testamentary trust, inter vivos trust. And remember, when a trust inherits from you, the trust is not my spouse. That means there will be estate duty. But when a trust inherits from me in a specific way related to a product nomination where there's beneficiaries, interesting capital gains tax from me to the trust can roll. Doesn't have to be paying capital gains tax. There's no will. There's no master. There's no delays. There's no executor's fees. That means, for example, you could save, if you have the right structure and you passed away in the trust and the money rolls into a trust, you can save me 18% capital gains tax. You can save me 4.03% executor's fees with absolutely no delays. So I want to show you the way there are ways to restructure for the benefit of donations. You can talk about. Interesting, my last comment on donations is people forget when I die, from 0 to 30 million pays estate duty at 20%, then 25%. But I have that same scale, but a different scale when I donate money. So when I want to donate money in my lifetime, I can do it at 20% instead of me dying and pay estate duty at 25%. Business assurance, if I have businesses, beneficiary nominations I'll get to, and retirement funds. But let's move on. So when you look and you say, Albert, show me your type of investment vehicles. Now remember, when I die, yes, I want smooth succession, smooth transition. I want transition as cost-effective as possible. All of those things. So when I close my eyes as a single person, I'm assuming here my wife had passed away, and I'm the single person. Now, I'm going to say something now which is very important, and I believe very strong about it. When I go to Tanya today, and I say, Tanya, help me with financial advice. Tanya said, Albert, we can do X, Y, and Z. And I said, no, Tanya, stop it there. I don't worry. Albert could see her. Don't worry about estate duty. I don't worry about donations tax. I don't worry about capital gains tax, because when I die, my wife gets everything from me. Everything rolls between my wife. I said, Tanya, that's a wrong comment, because when I die today, everything rolls to my wife. But remember now, my wife is a single lady. Now, when she passed away, every single tax imaginable will hit her. Now, when you do financial planning with Tanya must say, Albert, or I say to Tanya, when you do a financial plan for Albert Coetzee, even though he's married, treat him as a single person. Because when you treat me as a single person, that when I die and the money goes to my wife, she is now a single person as well. There's a lot of additional benefits she will now share and enjoy. For example, she doesn't have to pay capital gains tax when she dies, goes to the children or the trust. She doesn't have to pay executors' fees. Potentially, in some cases, there doesn't have to be a delay because the investment structure you use were nominated by beneficiary nomination, which means touch with the will does not have to apply. Bit difficult to explain it in the air, but I just want to plant the seed for you that you can take note. So the various options here, look at the local and offshore discretionary investment. That can be my South African unit trust, my South African share portfolio, my overseas unit trust, my overseas share portfolio. If it's, for example, discretionary investments, what will apply? South African will, estate duty if my wife is not the beneficiary, capital gains tax if my wife is not the beneficiary, executor fee, why? Because the will is in place and the will apply. And because you're in the hands of the master's net, potential delays. When you look at the left block and you throw it into the right block, same sort of discretionary investment, but different vehicle, you can see the only tax that's forced on you is estate duty, assuming you were the last dying spouse. Everything else I mentioned on the left block can then be avoided. Another topic which is very close to my heart is retirement fund. So when you're in the audience members today, I still work. I got a pension fund, a provident fund. I've resigned from my job. Remember, Albert resigned a year ago from 91. I have a preservation provident fund. I have a retirement annuity. All of those products are governed by the Pensions Fund Act. And when you close your eyes and you hear the Pensions Fund Act, you must look at second from the bottom, section 37C of the Pensions Fund Act. There, the trustees have up to 12 months to determine and confirm and sign off, say, who is Albert's actual dependent before they pay that money out. So when you look at retirement funds, all I wanted to tell you, don't bank on this product line. To say very often when you look at retirement funds, in my view, is one of the 5th largest pillars of a client's sort of financial planning perspective, unless I'm an entrepreneurial client and unless I do not have retirement funds. But then, for example, the client does retirement annuities. And remember that point earlier when I said point number 2, manipulate estate duty. That normally comes from large discretionary money out of my bank account into retirement annuities. Suddenly I have retirement annuity, even though I don't work for a corporate that have pension funds. So as long as you remember retirement funds and say, don't bank on that to make, if I die on Monday, my wife is going to have that money on Tuesday. Very, very important. Then a lot of clients, the moment you reach the age of 55, people move over to a living annuity, and a living annuity, the right-hand side now will pay me an income. Very strange. Now I'm over 55. Now I'm in a product vehicle that pays me income. But interesting, the most sort of visible point here, the living annuity is governed by the Long-Term Assurance Act. And there, for example, you can nominate the neighbor if you want. And if I die on Monday and I have my death certificate 2 weeks later, the living annuity can roll across to my spouse. So the living annuity for me is a fantastic product if you have it, because that can create liquidity on death to my spouse 2 weeks after I died, 2 weeks after I submitted the death certificate. But very important, on condition that the living annuity beneficiary nominations is structured correctly. Now, I can have a session on a living annuity and beneficiary nominations only because there's so many ways to skin the cat in that perspective. Some people, right or wrong, actually dictate from the grave, because on a living annuity, if structured correctly, you can even nominate, for example, a trust. If, for example, my spouse is not financially astute, if, for example, my spouse, when I die, have Alzheimer's, I, for example, have children, one is dependent on me, or potentially there's addiction problems, etc., I can dictate to that to say on my death of the living annuity that the trusts can take it over. Potentially for that not to fall in the hands of the child where there's potential risk. Then finishing off on beneficiary nomination, I mentioned to you earlier, that's on this topic, that topic ties a lot into sort of what we talk about death and succession on death. Remember a living annuity, there you are, I own it, and Tanya, my wife, is the beneficiary. But then, for example, what if something happened to me and Tanya together? What if something happened to me, the owner, and during COVID, we saw, oh my goodness, something happened to Tanya before. Remember, then the living annuity must pay out to my estate, net of 36% tax, retirement tax tables, which is massive. So adding to beneficiary nominations, you also have a thing called alternative beneficiary that just create that safety net should something happen to the primary owner and the primary beneficiary together. And the alternative beneficiary is at no cost. Somebody is extremely powerful not to force this investment to be paid out. Because remember, the problem with retirement funds, living annuities, when it pays out to the estate because of incorrect beneficiary nominations, there's no beneficiary nominations left, etc., the taxes are massive before it gets paid into the estate. And there the rate can be as high as 36%. And on top of that, very importantly, it is also now, when the money pays to my estate, is now part of my will. When you sit and you listen to me today, I highly urge you, very important, this is related to 91 specific, but have a look at this article to say what are the various options should you be interested. And the other thing, very important, are you, for example, sitting here and I've got retirement funds, very important, is again related to 91. And remember, with retirement funds, you see in the middle there, 37C of the Pensions Fund Act, also depends on the interpretation of the various trustees of the various retirement funds. So the 91 interpretation is definitely not the same as other interpretations. But when you look or read this article, you can almost get a sense of what the trustees look at before they make an allocation. You can potentially say, you know what, let me allocate or sort of indicate the beneficiaries correctly related to my retirement fund. When I talk about my will, and Tanya, I'm going to get you back quickly here. You mentioned to me that in a will, sort of like you had a discussion of a client recently, and you potentially have a comment here related to the will. You're on mute, Tanya? Not yet? No, I can't hear you yet. Does it? This Bailey.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, a little bit louder. A little bit louder. Unless, Bailey, you can hear Tanya well?
Yes.
Ah, yeah. Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. Over to you, Tanya.
Still not.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Apologies for the technical issue there. Yes, Albert, one thing that we've come across a few times is with regards to the question, should a parent share any details with regards to their will before they die, or should they leave it up to the executor to do it post-death? Now, one thing people don't always realize, a will isn't actually a private document forever. The minute it's lodged with the master, it becomes a public document. So you're not really choosing between secrecy and disclosure. I'm going to say that again. You're not choosing between secrecy and disclosure. You are choosing whether your people that are going to inherit from you, hear it from you with the context that you've put it in and the love that you've put it behind it, or whether they left to make sense of it on their own. And we've seen if all the assets are split equally between the loved ones, it's an easy process. But of course, if it's split unequally or there's certain decisions not to leave something behind to a certain child, that becomes more complicated. And that specific person suffers throughout their life. So when most people hear this, that it's actually a public document at the end, it makes them feel a bit better to have a conversation sooner rather than later. And you don't have to share all the details in the will, but it makes sense to share some of the structure. If you choose not to have the conversation before you die, it's a good idea to put it in writing, not typing it, put it in your own handwriting, explaining your decisions to your heirs, and more specifically, children that are not inheriting and the reason for your decision. So there's no right and wrong way. I would like to mention a few reasons for sharing it before you die and then for not sharing it. So just quickly, if you think about the benefits for sharing it before you die, family expectations are managed in advance, which reduces the chance of family disputes at the end. You get to explain your reason whilst you're alive, particularly if anything unusual is in the will or unequal. And children or other beneficiaries still have time to have a discussion with you and ask the questions that they want to ask you. And it can prevent certain misunderstandings. But on the other hand, we also have to look at the following factors, which are some reasons not to share any details before you die. Because wills can be amended at any time before death. So you might share something and then you change your mind and it becomes awkward. Or life circumstances change, for example, divorces or new grandchildren, and that might affect your flexibility in terms of family pushback. So in blended families, early disclosure can start fights while you're still alive and you're caught in the middle. Or a child who expects an inheritance might make different choices in life with regards to their career, for example. And then known beneficiaries can also pressurize an elderly person or vulnerable person to vary the terms of the will. So those are some of the factors for and against sharing details in a will. So as I said, there's no right and wrong answer, but you know your family situation best, and it's up to each individual then to make that choice when to share it and how to share it. Thanks, Albert.
Thank you, Tanya. That is extremely valuable. I've learned from that as well. Just from my world is product, my world is structuring of product. And Tanya, I'm a strong believer. Sometimes you sit with the primary family member and you look at it, and I always say, and people laugh at me, when I do financial planning with Tanya, the financial plan must read like a story. To say, Albert, you do this today. If something happened to you today, absolutely everything rolls over to the spouse. And apart from the taxes that roll, the money is available 2 weeks later. On the mother's passing, for example, then that rolls to the children. There's no capital gain, there's no master, there's no executor. But because the father, for example, in my case, didn't invite the mother and the children to the table at that discussion, on my passing, everything falls flat. So Tanya talks about the will, I talk about investment structure. So if your investments or portfolio related to structuring, efficiency, estate duty, all those type of savings, I'm a strong believer that you have to give a seat at the table to the spouse and the children. Now, yes, that comes with conflict, but sometimes I don't know how to manage that. Sort of that's Tanya, that's your job, sort of like to manage it with the client. But don't try to protect everything away from them. Because yes, you're hiding the will away from, as Tanya mentioned. But remember, in my world, is you're hiding the product benefits away from them. Because remember, when I die and my wife take it over, Doesn't matter what Tanya says. If my spouse takes in cash, she takes the cash. Knowing or not knowing, that money now is net of 36% tax deducted. That money now lies in my wife's estate. And that money one day will be part of her estate duty, where everything here could have been avoided. When you look at this, and I'm not going to spend time on that, when I have Albert and I passed away, and my will governs the investment, you'll see everything on the left, and I assume me on the left, I'm the last dying spouse. My wife have passed away. If structured correctly, everything here can be avoided. So I just wanted to highlight to you again how important structuring is. Now, not spending too much time, this every day working with Tanya and other advisors across the country in my new sort of work, and even when I worked at 91, I get stories daily. Now, Tanya would know, I visualize the story, I make the story alive, I give the story names. So every story in front of you now, I can spend like an hour on each one of them. So they're real life cases. But you don't have to worry about the detail. I just want you to see the common denominator. Look at the ages. My mother is 83. She's healthy. She lives outside Cape Town in beautiful Montague. And I would think in the past, Ma, you're 83 years old. Your investments are in place. Don't touch. We only really look at it at time of death. But when she realized, you know what, on death, as a single mother, I'll pay capital gains tax anyway. How can I restructure it today that when I passed away, capital gain is not applicable? When my mother looked at her investment portfolio, she said, one of my children, maybe not, is dependent on me. Look at this middle one, the 93-year-old man from Constantia had 2 children. The one daughter was dependent on him. So he said, I cannot die with the money in my bank account. The daughter is going to wait forever. How do I restructure the investment? And interesting, looking at 91, this client gave us the money on Tuesday. He died on Thursday. 2 weeks later, the daughter had the money. Yes, very important. That money does form part of his estate for estate duty purposes. But the main drive here was to speed up succession to the daughter, because you could not get caught in the master's net. So I just want to show you that that's not a trend, and I'm definitely not telling you go to Tanya and sell, most definitely not, because I don't think I'll be invited back again. But just be aware that there's no age cap on when you re-look at your investments. If you look at the bottom line there, look at top right, Citus tax. Apart from the delay and the massive delay to transfer the overseas share portfolio across to the next beneficiary, the person said, I'd much rather pay 25% estate duty in South Africa than actually get caught into 40% Citus tax in America. If there's now one line I want you to remember when leaving the session today, is if you're not organized, if everything is not in place, remember your life file. Now, a life file I can send, if you quickly look at it, a life file is a comprehensive centralized collection of essential personal, financial, and legal documents designed to assist loved ones in managing affairs during emergencies, incapacitation, or after death. So when you have a life file, imagine I passed away, my wife literally can take the file and give it to the lawyers and say, this is the file that you need to submit to the master's office. Now, when looking at the life file, I can forward you this one, is just sort of various items, but I've summarized it for you here, is if you close your eyes, is where's my will, where's my letter of wishes, where's my income tax statement details, where's my ID docs and passport, where's my marriage certificates, my divorce and maintenance agreements? Where's my investments equals my will? Where's my investments equal beneficiary nominations? Where's my bank account details, source of income, liabilities, extra? Then you'll see bottom right, there's an other. It doesn't stop here. Other now goes all the way down. I'm not going to go through them because I'll mail them to you. But Tanya, if you look at the 4th one from the bottom, you had a comment regarding login details and passwords, as if you want to convey your message to the audience.
Yes, thank you. Just to test, Albert, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yes, my life these days have been severely changed by Papaya. So the Poppy Act, as you can imagine, every day I feel like I have to break into a bank because every single document that we open is password protected and different passwords apply to the different investments and clients. So I do not know how the poor executor must feel when they and the family members when they have to deal with closing of certain accounts and cancelling subscriptions in the deceased's name. So I want to mention a few things what not to do. Okay, so don't put your device's pins or passwords in the will itself. It sounds logical maybe, but don't do it. It's a public document at the end of the day that's lodged with the master. Second of all, don't write your passwords on a piece of paper and put it in a bedside table or even in a safe. We live in South Africa, as you know, and I had a client that was robbed last week and everything in her safe was taken. So that's also not a good idea. Don't email passwords to yourself or store them in your Google Drive and call your spreadsheet passwords, because if your computer is hacked, it's very easy to trace it. And don't rely on a single trusted person remembering it verbally, because you might be changing it or their memory might get lost. So these days, in the days of technology, there's amazing apps that can be used. And there's no single mechanism, but I suggest that you follow a layered approach. So I'm going to give you some suggestions. We'll also email it afterwards. The first one is use a password manager as a central vault. Some of the managers, it's called 1Password, so it's the number one and then password, Bitwarden, NordPass, or ProtonPass. So those are good ones to use. Now you can ask me, okay, once I've registered, how will the executor know how to access this? Now, for example, on 1Password, when you register or subscribe, you print they call it an emergency kit, which is a PDF generated when you set up the account containing your email and your secret key, which won't ever change. That you can have stored with your will at the executive's office or in wherever you save it. Okay, so that's a good idea of how to store your passwords. Then the third level, so that was the second level. Then the third level that I'm referring to is in Apple, they've got something like an Apple Legacy Contact. So complete that on your computer or Google Inactive Account Manager. So I'm not going to go into the details of exactly how that works, but in short, the single best thing that you can do is set up a password manager, print the recovery document, store that with your will, and switch on your Apple Legacy Contact or your Google Inactive Account Manager. Okay, so that's on passwords. Oh, but before we proceed, we've got a few questions that I think would be good to address at this point. Okay. So the first one was going back to a few slides back with regards to a living annuity. If you add an alternative beneficiary in your will, can it be actioned or must it be nominated with the administrator?
Very important. So when I die on a living annuity, 91 or the product provider would look at the living annuity and what beneficiary was nominated. If it's blank, it's literally sorry for you, that money must be paid out to the estate net of tax. So a living annuity, the beneficiary nomination override the will. So whenever I mentioned a product or product vehicle where there were beneficiary nominations, you literally do not have to refer to that investment in your will again. Now, alternative beneficiary can also be a problem because I'm the owner, my wife is the beneficiary primary, and I have two daughters. Now, when, for example, I die and my wife died, but there was a car accident, maybe my one daughter passed away, the other daughter gets everything. So maybe the deceased daughter is married with children, she gets nothing. So Tanya, then you look, for example, which I like, depending on the product provider you use. I sometimes would say Albert owns and Tanya is the beneficiary. Because my aim is when something happened to me, the living annuity must get as fast as possible to Tanya to look after Tanya. That's why I nominate Tanya by name. But then as alternative beneficiary, I don't mention my two daughters' name because the advisor constantly have to check. That's a full-time job to see if the daughter's alive. So what I personally will do, depending on the platform, I would say Albert Tanya estate. When you say estate, then you can govern with that in your will. But watch out now, if you are with product provider 1, they may define the word estate. Sorry for you, we pay out. Now with 91, touch wood, the word estate, it's say, so obviously when Albert die, who steps in the shoes of Albert as the temporary owner of all assets, which is the executor. And now remember now, you need to train the executor to say, Mr. Executor, you have an option here. Go look at the will. Yes, there's 2 daughters. Give them the living annuity. Yes, there's 1 daughter, but the other daughter is dead. Give that family member the living annuity. And then the executor can come to 91 and say, that is my instruction. But what you can see here, Tanya, is different interpretation of different houses. And very important is you invite the executor to the table, invite the wife, invite the children, that they can see how the product works, what's the intention, what are the consequences if you don't follow it, that you actually can plan accordingly. But to leave it only up to me, the investor, and then die, and hope they understand and are educated accordingly is not ideal. Sorry, it's quite long-winded, but hopefully that is clear.
Thanks. Albert, there's 2 more questions that I'm going to ask now, and then you can proceed, and then we'll deal with the rest of the questions at the end. So the other question was, who should I appoint as my executor, and are they capable of handling the responsibilities? So if I may answer that one. In terms of your executor, what I propose is you can have 2 choices. You can appoint a family member or someone that's an accountant or a lawyer, and they can always, at your death, they've got the ability to pass that on to a formal executor at the time. So they can basically stand off the executorship and appoint someone who knows what they're doing. Okay. If you haven't been an executor before, I strongly suggest don't try and do it. It's quite a complex process. It's a long process. Appoint someone and pay for that executor that knows what they're doing. So that's the second choice, is you can appoint a fiduciary company that focuses solely on executorships and estate dealings. For example, at Grey Swan, we use a company called Servo. They're one of our preferred choices. That is what they do. They don't do anything else. I would think twice to appoint, for example, a bank as the executor, because there you will only be a number in a queue and not necessarily the executor won't have any dealings with your family. So that's my 2 cents worth. Albert, I don't know if you want to add something to that.
No, I agree with you, Tanya. Just to highlight to the audience, remember, when I die, if the executor takes over, he or she is the temporary owner of the asset. So that person needs to be sort of strong, because they actually manage the portfolio before distributing to the beneficiaries. So when your executor going to fall apart on my death, when your beneficiary potentially going to be overwhelmed, because remember now, when I die today, actually legally, nothing can happen to that estate until it's wind up maybe 2 years later. But in many cases, Tanya, when the executor is appointed and he can see, you know what, the wife is getting everything, that means there's no taxes, let me do some advancements to her to be able to keep her going, if, for example, then there were no money in her hands. So that executor needs to be astute to maybe saying, maybe let's do an advancement or not, but keep enough money left, put attention to pay creditors, cost, etc. So if that person is strong enough to do that, or maybe very importantly, I die, my wife have the money, she passed away. Remember now goes to the children. Now, if that executor wants to make advancements because the children can't wait for 2 years or even longer to finalize, he needs to be very careful, because when he allows all the cash to go, he eventually has to sell off assets to pay estate duty, capital gains, executor fees, etc., etc. So I like the middle person to appoint someone. The middle person must be strong enough. But also very important, Tanya, I like them. And the middle person can be one of two people. Doesn't have to be one person, that executor, because that person, when he appoints the law firm that actually can proceed, he can also fire the law firm if he feels, for example, it doesn't go fast enough and efficient enough. So hopefully I answer the question there. So there's lots of bits and buts, but hopefully that's clarity. You got one more question, Tanya?
The last question before we move on, and please take note, we have 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
I think to answer the question and then proceed with the presentation. I do understand that some people have to leave at 4 o'clock, so we can continue, and you are welcome to finish your presentation, Albert. Those people that needs to leave by 4, please just leave the call. We will send you the recording. The last question I want to ask here is, what happens if you die without a will?
You die intestate. And then, very importantly, you follow the Intestate Act to say, for example, I wanted to leave something to you, Tanya. That means nothing. Now, suddenly, for example, it goes to this act of intestate vet to say, okay, fine, suddenly they follow the tree of the tree branch closest to you, and that's you have no say around that. And also that will add additional layers of, for example, delays in that regard. So wherever possible, try to avoid that. And remember also, when you look at your retirement funds, where you nominated Albert and Susan as beneficiaries, you indicated to the trustees where your intention are. If you leave that blank on a beneficiary nomination, they will definitely then wait for 12 months because they have no idea what your intention is. Moving on, Tanya, quick. So you have this sort of points related to this life file. But then remember now, if you add, there's another layer of list. Because remember now, I died. So if you create your own life file, take the previous slides, in my view, and merge it with this slide. The only thing here which you won't have is obviously your original death certificate and the notice of death. Most of the other things here you will have already to be able to merge in a comprehensive life file. Now we've dealt 1 to 5. We've dealt with Albert still alive. Albert attended today's session. Albert can say, how can I restructure my investments, my life, my state to be as most efficient as possible? But now I passed away. When you look at here, now immediately when I passed away, you need to distinguish between have I died from natural causes, or have I died, if you look at the next slide, unnatural causes. That's very important. And then when I've died from natural causes, have I died at home, or have I died at hospice, or have I died, for example, in the hospital? Now, when you died at home, and the people that have to leave, don't worry, I made these next 5, 6 slides very detailed, comprehensive. You can literally read these slides to say, when I died at home, who do I contact? You contact your doctor or your emergency services, or when you look at the next slide, I gave you the numbers of the Netcare 911 or the ER24. Then, very importantly, who must come and collect my body if I died at home? When you died in the hospice or the hospital, fantastic, they do everything for you. But when I died at home, my wife needs to phone the funeral home. Now, very important, again, in your life file, I don't know you, but I don't know where's my funeral home in my area, and I definitely don't have the telephone number of my funeral home. Now, I pictured in my scenario, I died and my wife remained. The next step is, as you said, immediately after my death, obviously my wife notified the family members. If I lived alone, she looked after my house and my pets. And very important, she contacted the medical professionals if I indicated in my life file that I was an organ donor. If I would die of unnatural causes, now that is a worry, because when you die of unnatural causes, you potentially will get a death certificate, but it will indicate the unnatural causes. Now, even your retirement fund will close down, because remember, the trustees of your retirement are very scared. They cannot pay to the wrong people. And remember in Afrikaans, die bloedige hand kan nie erf nie. So they have to check what happened related to unnatural causes, and they potentially won't make any allocation until the police report is clarified. But when you look at point number 2, do not move the body or remove everything. And also here, if you look at point number 3, it's that the police services and the police department that will remove the body, not the funeral home, and they will also do the post-mortem event to be able to check or confirm the reason of death. Then only on point number 4, the funeral director is considered later, contacted later, once the police report is finalized. And then lastly, the police or the investigating officer will issue a case number to obtain, to be able to provide it to the estate or the executor to the master's office. Then moving to the next step. In the first week after I died, you need to, or my wife need to liquidate the will. So giving her a week to find the will for me is already very lenient, because remember, in my view, she needs to know where that will is. Then she made contact with the funeral home to say Albert needs to be buried and Albert needs to cremate it. Once I'm buried or cremated, then obviously the funeral home will issue a notification of death, and also the death certificate issued by the Department of Home Affairs. Now, there is vagueness on the Department of Home Affairs. They issued a death certificate to my wife. She is now going to take it, for example, to the next meeting. Here you are, if you look at the point number 2, to meet my lawyers to get the process going. But watch out, what we also have found in cases that the Department of Home Affairs, when they get the death certificate, let all the financial institutions and banks know. And when a bank hear about it, they close down. And even though I'm the spouse, I'm inheriting everything from my husband. Remember, the bank account was in the name of my husband. That bank account closed. You cannot touch that. So how to avoid this, very important, is to say maybe, as I said before, that when I die, make sure my wife has at least 12 months sort of income or cash in her own hands to survive in case the bank account's closed. If the bank account is not closed, legally, it's get frowned on, but remember, seeing that my spouse is the only beneficiary, we do find cases where the spouse would go to the bank account. If the spouse is too late, unfortunately, now you need to wait for the executor to be appointed, and that can take anything short as 6 months and longer. So again, watch out, the spouse needs to have enough cash in her bank account. When you now move to the next process, first of all, immediately, a week later, now, for example, is the process to get going to the master's office. Winding up of the process, now all documents from my wife will be handed over and to the executor or the law firm that will run with the process. Now imagine you had your life file ready with that. Now you don't have to run around to be able to gather that file. Once you've submitted to the law firm that were appointed by the executor, the law firm will do a report and to the estate of the master's office, and that is very importantly, that can be done online. Normally, the rule is an estate should be reported to the master's office 14 days after death, but also soonest as later. And very important, if I would die today, then, for example, a letter of executorship does not have to be appointed if my estate was smaller than 250,000 rand. So hopefully, Tanya, I didn't rush through that process, because this process I've just touched on the last 3 slides is vital, because that is, especially if my wife wasn't educated. Now, remember now, the idea of today, without sounding forceful or arrogant, is to say, if I'm the primary member of my estate, I've now listened to Albert and Tanya and called my children and my spouse to the table. We opened and created our own life file. We've allocated money to my wife in her own hands in case the bank account closed faster than expected. And then very importantly, I've taken my wife through the previous 3 slides. Again, very important, assuming I, the husband, die first. Now, the final slide, Tanya, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Just wanted to show you now, once the executor letter has been issued, the executor now will say, okay, fine, I need to go do the groundwork. Now the estate is being advertised as an estate. Now, remember, you're inviting all the creditors. Now, very important, my husband or my bank account is closed, can't open it again. Now, the executor needs to open an estate late bank account, for example, at the bank. Now, that open movement from the closed bank account from me to the estate late can take up to 10 weeks, if not longer. Remember, my wife needs the money because somehow the bank account closed. Everything was in the husband's name. She waited for the executor to be appointed, but that doesn't mean the bank account's open tomorrow. That means now the closed bank account needs to move to the estate late bank account, which potentially can take some time. And remember now, my wife can't demand money because it's up to the executor to now make advancements in line with all the other requirements he needs to look after and look out. So watch out for that. Once the groundwork is done, then the executor and the law firm prepare a liquidation and distribution account to provide all the various information. Once that is done, it gets sort of for public inspection, it actually gets advertised at the master's office as well as the magistrate's court to say, okay, fine, are there any last minute sort of objections or comments before it actually gets distributed to the beneficiaries. I see you online, Tanya. I'm handing over, but just want to show you each of these sort of categories can take up to 3 to 5 months. That means an estate to wind up can take up to 24 months. Remember now, if I had investment vehicles with beneficiary nominations, yes, this process still have to apply, but my wife said, you know what, it can take as long as I want because I already have the money or already inherited via beneficiary a living annuity, for example. And Tanya, before I hand over to you, somebody mentioned to me the other day, which it resonated to me so well, is this sentence here, is that I spent my life building an estate, but unfortunately my estate is not organized, it's cluttered. So when I passed away, what I leave my family with assets, but what I don't leave my family with, I don't leave my family with time to allow them to grieve before they kick into action, because the estate is not in order. Over to you, Tanya.
Thank you very much for those wide words and also for guiding us through this presentation today. I think everyone took some very worthwhile snippets with them and chewing on a few things over the next few days. And to add on to all that, what I've also heard is people say the kindest thing you can do for people you love is to make sure that the first week after your death is not the worst week of their lives. Okay, before we close off on, there's 2 questions that I'll quickly answer. The first one is, will my beneficiaries actually receive what I intend in my will, and how accurately are bequests allocated? I would like to answer like this. If you've got a good executor, whatever is in your will should be accurately distributed if your will was worded properly. The second part to that, remember, in terms of your retirement annuities, that falls outside of your will. So their trustees have discretion. You will have a nomination form with your dependents on there. But very importantly, as Albert said right at the beginning, the trustees have up to 12 months to do their own investigations and ensure that whoever was financially dependent on you receives something. So your will is whatever you decide. the retirement annuities, there's an extra layer of fiduciary services provided by the trustees to make sure that everyone financially dependent on that person is well looked after post-death. Then the other question is, how often should
Tanya, just before I just add that down to, even if the audience member have a retirement annuity and maybe they're not 55 and they have very specific requirements, I would say, again, write a letter to say, I nominate my one daughter, Tanya. These are my reasons. Or very important, I nominate a trust as a beneficiary of my retirement fund, a retirement annuity. Very unique, very unheard of, but it is possible. This is my reason why, because my one daughter potentially is disabled, or my one daughter, for example, is not good with money. So then the platform or the product house would flag that letter to the retirement annuity. So when I die one day, it's an indication to the trustees what my intention was. Otherwise, remember, they start from a clean slate. They have no idea who you were and what your intentions were. So I would then flag something to the retirement annuity, not a given, Tanya, but at least it's an indication to the trustees what my wishes and my thinking were.
Okay, thank you very much, Albert. And then the last question that I'll be addressing, and the other ones I'll answer them by email, is how often should I review my estate and the investment structure? Now, I would say the investment structure or investment review, that's annually. Annually need to look at that. In terms of an estate duty calculation, I would say every 3 years makes sense, but with GraceOne, it's a standard item on our annual reviews. We ask, is there a will in place? Does anything need to change? So it can be a talking point, or wherever there's a life change event, you should ensure that your will is updated accordingly.
Yeah. And Tanya, I can add there's something which we haven't touched on, and maybe that's a session for another day, is very important. If I break South African tax residency, I emigrate. For example, I need to relook at my affairs, but very often, very important, is that I live in Cape Town, I'm going to die in Cape Town, but my one daughter have just moved to Australia, or my one son, for example, moved to England, or my one child moved to the Netherlands. Very importantly, foreign children also dictate what they can or cannot inherit. So very often we find the parents adjust their portfolios, investments, estates, not because of the parent, because the parent can die in South Africa, but because of the foreign child, to avoid huge, massive, unintended consequences in the hands of the child, when the child one day inherited from the parent who died in South Africa. So that's another idea, so another component, Tanya, to relook at your will and your portfolio if your children moves around.
Very good point, Albert. Albert, it was lovely having you. Thank you for all your insights and the wisdom that you shared.
Tanya.
To all the participants, within the next few days, we will email the recording to you. We will email Albert's presentation. We will add the password document, and then a document listing what needs to be in your live file. Okay, thank you very much for attending, and enjoy your day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.